continuing our reading from The Breathless, Dark Ripples, Part 1. Chapter 8, A Matter of Timing. He wonders how everything in his life has become so complicated. It hasn't been simple in a long, long time. Gregory T. Lestrade receives his promotion to detective inspector in September of 1999. It would never have happened so soon, surely, if Gregson and Price hadn't both taken their retirement in that same year. It seems to Greg that his relative inexperience as a detective should carry more weight than his years of service on the police force. But whatever the extenuating circumstances, DCI Edwards' final decision is swift and unchallenged. On the day the announcement comes out, Greg is reluctant to tell his wife. He is pleased by the change, of course. It's a step he's looked forward to taking in his career for quite some time. But his home, right now, well, it's not exactly a great place to bring happy news. Their baby should have been due sometime this very week. When Greg opens the door at the end of the day, he finds the flat silent and dark. The last he checked, Nadia didn't have any dinner events on her work schedule. He briefly wonders if she's gone out with a friend, perhaps, or maybe she's stayed out late to sit and think in some pub, alone, musing over the redux of the depression she'd already fought her way through that spring. That'd be more his style, though. No, there's a simpler explanation. He pads upstairs in sock feet and gently opens the bedroom door. No lights are burning here either, but Nadia has opened the drapes to the patchy glow of moon and street lamps. Greg can see the shape of her, curled on her side beneath the covers. Greg says nothing as he crosses the room. Her eyes are open, a dark glitter visible from the shadows, but she doesn't track his movement beyond a bare flicker. When he slips onto the bed behind her, fully clothed, she shifts only slightly. Bringing his hand to rest very lightly on her shoulder, he licks his lips and tries to find words to express his emotions. In the heavy silence of Nadia's morning, he can't seem to figure out how to speak or what to say. I understand. No, whatever he's feeling, he wasn't the one who had experienced the early stirrings of new life, whose body had begun changing to bring it forth. Greg already knows he can never completely understand. I wish it had been different. It's a pointless sentiment. Of course he does. Who wouldn't? It brings with it, too, the memory of his years of arguing against having children, and that's the last thing he wants to remind her of. I want to make it better. Another laughably useless offer. None of his trained skills, his natural talents, his inexplicable abilities can be of any use here. The loss is an indelible mark, though it may fade eventually. He can't do a thing to make it disappear. I love you, he finally manages to whisper into her hair, his voice choked with the force of everything he's holding back. Even that feels inadequate. Nadia pulls in a deep breath, and after an endless still moment, she lifts her hand to meet his. When their fingers intertwine, Greg sighs in relief. He stays there with her the rest of the night in silent vigil, without supper, eventually falling into troubled sleep with his arms wrapped carefully around her. Over the next few weeks, Nadia begins to return to herself somewhat, bouncing back towards the same brisk, focused energy and light-hearted sensuality for which he'd fallen in love with her 13 years before. Still, Greg treads carefully. It's about a month, right around her 36th birthday actually, before he brings her the news of his promotion. For a few days, he relates weeks-old stories about being assigned his first subordinates and settling into his first office, as if they've just happened. He knows he's become a better liar over the years, and the bulk of what he's telling her is true, but he's a bit surprised that she doesn't seem to suspect his bending of the truth. She's treated him like a different person, it seems, ever since that night in early March. And although she never says anything outright to place blame on him, Greg still feels intensely guilty. It may have been merely a coincidence of timing, a medical fluke, and if he were anyone else, he might be inclined to believe that. But Greg is undeniably something unique, and he can't stop thinking about the deep-seated misgivings he'd had from the very first moment. No matter how he tries to view the situation pragmatically, he comes back around to the ripples. Had his potential child been taken from him purposefully by the decree of whatever forces tied him to Sherlock? Had the use of his gift that fateful evening caused repercussions of energy that could affect Nadia's fragile womb from 2 streets away? Or had the sheer psychic force of Greg's doubt been enough to make the pregnancy fail? He truly can't comprehend the source of his ability. Perhaps he possesses greater power than he knows. No matter the reason, even if there really was no reason whatsoever but random chance, none of these painful thoughts plaguing Greg are at all possible for him to share. It's just more to add to the ever-growing pile of secrets and lies that sits malignant in the center of his marriage bed. Greg is mostly used to the unpredictable fluctuations of the ripples after so many years. Dangerous times are followed by quiet periods, long and increasingly ominous. He always tries for as long as he can not to relax his guard. After a point, though, it's impossible to stay alert and focused on the likely perils in Sherlock's invisible life. The awareness of his risk inevitably subsides, adding its particular flavor to the background noise of Greg's permanent worries. He wonders if this is just an automatic coping strategy. If he were to dwell on the situation day after day, fixating on the unknowable and the unpredictable, he'd surely cause himself a heart attack or something before very long. In his first year as a DI, the prevailing worry is drug overdose. For months, the knowledge of what Sherlock had gotten into stays with him, echoes of that remembered shock continually present like a persistent toothache. He practically jumps at shadows sometimes. He feels so tense and unhappy. But the expected ripples don't come. And although he's unwilling to believe his charge has kicked the habit, eventually he allows himself to hope that the respite might mean more than controlled, continued addiction. The first breath of spring is just beginning to spread across the city, but Greg isn't out enjoying the fresh air, nor the repugnant breeze of a murder scene, as it happens. His last case had ended the day before in a complicated triple arrest, the execution of which had unfortunately incurred some property damage. Now, Greg has to sit and type up the required paperwork, fleshing out a final report based on his handwritten notes and those of his team. He's finding it difficult to stay focused, though, with speculation about Sherlock repeatedly rearing its head. There's a knock on the door of his closet-sized office. Frowning, Greg drops a finger onto the file to keep his place in Sergeant Oliver Berkeley's untidy scribble. "Come in," he calls, hoping it's Berkeley come to help decipher the mess. D.I. Parsons enters instead, glancing around at Greg's cramped quarters with a slight smile. "Afternoon, Lestrade. Thought I'd see how you were getting on." "Not doing too badly, sir," he answers. "Heard about the case you've just closed? Good catch that, getting all 3 Braithwaite brothers in one shot. You should be pleased." "Don't I look pleased?" "Not so much, no. You look like you're waiting for the blade to hit the chopping block," Parsons tells him. "Stress too much for you, after all." No, it's fine," Greg says quickly. "I can handle it. It's not work that's got me down." The older man tilts his head, and his voice softens in understanding. "Your wife, still?" Greg nods reluctantly, his lips tightening. After Nadia's loss, and before the promotion, he'd been so obviously troubled that Parsons had drawn him aside for a rare heart-to-heart. He'd confessed the miscarriage, but nothing else, of course. Of everyone at the yard, Richard Parsons is the only one in whom Greg's confided, and he doesn't even know half of the truth. "Buck up, lad," his mentor sighs. "She'll come round eventually, and if not, well, you'll not be the only inspector here with troubles at home." He means well, clearly, but Greg doesn't find it very comforting. October's winds are howling outside the walls. Greg's up early, yawning around his toothbrush as he gets ready for work. He studies his reflection critically. He estimates he's reached about 1/3 salt to 2/3 pepper, which makes him look far closer to 50 than the 37 he is. It gives him a distinguished sort of look, he supposes. That's probably helpful in his position. He's not certain his single year of authority would carry as much weight if people didn't presume him to be older. So far, he's dressed only in his trousers. As he's thoughtfully stroking his face, trying to decide whether a rugged bit of stubble might be all right for the day ahead, Nadia appears at the bathroom door. "Almost done, dear," he murmurs, presuming she's up to use the loo. Her pink terry robe is loosely tied, and the flash of shapely leg in motion catches Greg's attention as he turns from the mirror. She steps up close to touch him, trailing light fingers through his chest hair and down his side, lingering at his hip and toying with the belt loop there. Her sleep dark eyes catch his with clear intent, and he feels an answering trip in his pulse. "Oh, hello, love," he says, breaking into a grin. "Good morning, I see." "I think it is. You've got time, don't you?" Yeah, a little bit, as long as we're quick." Chuckling throatily, she draws him out into the hall, speaking only with the heat in her smile. He's right there with her, on board for whatever she asks, eager to lose himself in sensation as she leans in. Their kiss is slow, intense, dizzying. Then, just when her maddening touch reaches the zip of his uncomfortably tightened trousers, she breathes into his ear, "Just don't bother with the condom, darling." A cold flash of realization hits Greg, and he pulls back to look her in the eyes. "What? You heard me? You're trying to... Why would you do that?" She tilts her head saucily. "Why wouldn't I?" His willing mood is gone. Pity his lower half is slower to get the memo. Backing away from her, he tries to keep his voice calm, logical. "Don't you think it would be a worse idea now? Because you're a year older? Thought that was one of the risk factors." "Yeah, I'm older. I'm running out of time, Greg. And whose fault is that? Remind me?" He stalks into the bathroom again, unable to face her. Even his own reflection seems accusing, though. He braces his arms against the side of the sink and hangs his head as he answers. "It's mine, yeah. It's my fault. I know it. You think I haven't blamed myself? Christ, dear." Changing tack, Nadia steps up behind him and slips her arms around beneath his. She spreads her delicate hands across his chest. "I want this. I want you." Straightening, Greg grasps her hands, pressing them tight over his heart to still their caress. "And I want you to be happy. But you know how this works. Statistically, there's a good chance we'll end up with the same result, and that would be even more painful for you." "It's my risk to take, Greg," she retorts, glaring over his shoulder to meet his eyes in the mirror. Frustration and anger wells up and spills over into his answer. "I don't want to see you hurt again. For God's sake, I never wanted this the first time." He knows instantly that he shouldn't have blurted that out. Her face drains suddenly to dead white. Her eyes go wide and shocked. "Fuck, dear, I'm sorry. I didn't mean that. You know that's not what I meant." "Then why don't you tell me exactly what you do mean, Greg?" Her voice is low, dangerous. She tugs her hands away from his, pulling her robe tight around herself as she puts space between them one more. "Nadia, love, don't do this to me. Don't drag me back into this. Make me say it all again. You already know my answers." Nadia stares him down across the bathroom. Finally, she says, "Go on, go to work. I think I'm going to go visit Mama today and stay there for the weekend." She sweeps out of the room, leaving him alone with his guilt. He wonders how everything in his life has become so complicated. It hasn't been simple in a long, long time.